Greetings, APUSH scholars, for our review of Unit 16, which is basically on the 1960s, the presidencies of Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and the course of the Vietnam War. And I'm looking at the review sheet for our class here. Top to bottom here, the 1960 election, very close election between the Democrat Kennedy, who wins narrowly over Richard Nixon. And remember, the Democrats are winning largely on the accusation that the Republicans have allowed a missile gap, that the Soviets have an advantage on us in that area. Think of Sputnik back in '57. And Kennedy is controversial also because he's Catholic. Remember, the last Catholic, L. Smith, lost in 1928 when he ran against Herbert Hoover. Keep in mind here that religious tests to be president are against the Constitution, at least a test that would be official here. But the tradition up to this point is that presidents are to be Protestant Christians. The Freedom Riders, in 1961, you have civil rights activists who are riding interstate buses to challenge the non-enforcement in the South of a Supreme Court decision the earlier year in 1960 banning segregation in interstate travel. And this led to several attacks in bus stations, especially across Alabama and Mississippi, against riders, in particular black riders that are sitting in white sections. Kennedy's Berlin speech in 1963 is in front of the Berlin Wall. It's that famous quote, "I am a Berliner," and it's underlining the U.S.'s support of West Germany in the face of the Soviet threat. And it's also telling the West Berliners that, and the West Germans, that we are on their side. The Bad Pigs Incident in 1961, this is where about 1,500 anti-Castro counter-revolutionaries land in southern Cuba at a place called the Bay of Pigs, and they're met by about 25,000 Cuban troops that have been tipped off. About 100 of these Bay of Pigs invaders are killed, about 360 wounded, and the rest are jailed. And one thing this shows is the irresolution of JFK, that he failed to provide air support, that he kind of chokes in supporting this invasion, which was planned earlier under the Eisenhower administration. This, along with the failure of Kennedy to do anything about the wall that's built in Berlin in '61, is going to lead to the Cuban Missile Crisis, where Khrushchev sticks missiles in Cuba under our nose in October of '62. These missiles are discovered by American U-2 spy flights, and Kennedy elects to set up a blockade, which he names a quarantine, to stop the shipment of future military supplies to Cuba. Khrushchev backs down, and the deal that's cut is for the missiles coming out, we'll remove our missiles that are stationed in or based in Turkey, and then we promise that we won't invade Cuba. The Alliance for Progress in 1961, this has been called a Marshall Plan for Latin America. The plan here is for economic development in Latin America, something along the lines of, in Europe, money for education, money for infrastructure, for roads, and for public health, things like that. And the bottom line here, very little success. The big thing in Latin America is the wealthy refuse to be involved in any redistribution of land. So many of the farmers in Latin America essentially don't own their own land, and this is something that the Alliance for Progress fails to do. But it's something that which is very popular. Kennedy's a very popular president in Latin America, along with the Peace Corps, which sends volunteers to do economic development and assistance as well. The Great Society, this is the program under LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, which is a program to promote civil rights and health reforms and education, conservation, and welfare. Some of the more notable pieces of this huge smorgasbord of programs: Medicare, health care for the elderly; Medicaid, which was health care for the indigent, for the poor; education, you have the Elementary and Secondary School Act and Head Start, pouring money into schools in needy areas, promoting things like special education and library programs and reading programs, just money into into schools. You have the Immigration Reform Act of 1865, which is going to end the bias in immigration, end the quotas, and there's going to be open immigration, irregardless of ethnicity and location. You have HUD, Housing and Urban Development, to build affordable housing in the urban core. The effect on poverty in America of the Great Society is poverty is reduced. Poverty goes down. But the problem for conservatives is there still is a persistent percentage of Americans that persist in poverty, which they're going to say is caused by behavior, something that the government can't address. And one of the impacts of the Great Society is that taxes are going to go up, the size of government is going to go up, and government's going to be perceived as being bullying and bossy and big. And this is going to be one of the complaints of the Republicans in later years. Problems with funding both the Great Society and the Vietnam War. You have this guns and butter phrase here that Johnson is trying to buy butter. He's trying to buy the Great Society's programs to make life better for the vulnerable in America, but he's also spending money in Vietnam, and this is going to cause inflation, and this is going to be especially a problem in the 1970s, in later years of the Nixon, the Ford, and the Carter administrations. 1963, the Washington, D.C. Civil Rights March here. This is the man who leads it, of course, here is Martin Luther King Jr. About 200 to 300,000 are marching on the Mall here. This is where he has gives the famous "I Have a Dream" speech. And it's a year later that you're going to have the 1964 Civil Rights Act will be signed into law by Lyndon Baines Johnson, banning discrimination in public places. And this also includes a ban on any discrimination based upon not just race, but on sex, on national origin, and religion. 1965 Selma to Montgomery March. There's actually three marches. The one you see in videos where the black marchers who are crossing the Pettus Bridge and they're on the sidewalk and looks like they're all men are all dressed in suits. It should be utterly inoffensive here. They're brutally attacked. They're tear gassed and they're beaten along with women. And that one is turned back. There's a second march, which is being led by Martin Luther King, and they are going to be told to turn back, and they'll do so. They won't provoke, or they won't allow the cops to be provoked and to attack them. And the third march, the one that actually makes it to Montgomery, is going to be protected by federal marshals that will be sent by the president to defend them. And there's 25,000 of them that will march to Montgomery. And this same year, you're going to have the Voting Rights Act passed, which will enforce the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. Remember, the 14th Amendment gives full citizenship to, essentially, we're talking about the African Americans that have just been freed after the Civil War, but to those who are natural-born citizens here. And the 15th Amendment specifically gives voting rights to all citizens. And what the Voting Rights Act does is it prohibits any voting law that discriminates against minorities, and will include literacy tests are prohibited. The SCLC, this is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and this is an organization that mobilizes black churches to help coordinate the civil rights movement and the protests. And the most famous member here, of course, is the Baptist pastor Martin Luther King Jr. But the civil rights movement is profoundly led by the black churches. This has a huge Christian influence. This idea of nonviolent civil disobedience is very much modeled on Jesus Christ, who, when he went to the cross, he could have called down legions of angels and blasted the Romans and the people who are crucifying him. But there's the black churches are, they're modeling the protests on Christ, on their Christian faith. So this is something to be noted. Martin Luther King Jr., how is he different from Malcolm X? Well, remember, Martin Luther King Jr. is the advocate of nonviolent civil disobedience, where Malcolm X is an advocate of violence if necessary to protect oneself by any means necessary. Famous quote of his. Some comparisons here to Booker T. Washington. Remember, Booker is an advocate of cooperation, of non-confrontation, that analogy of the fist, the fingers being separate, but the hand, not the fist, but the hand being, united, although the fingers are separate here. You have W.E.B. Du Bois, who's asking for immediate political and social equality. So he's a little bit more confrontational. Not an exact analogy, but maybe something that might work if you develop it as part of the synthesis in the redesign question. Earl Warren is the governor of California who's appointed to the Supreme Court, and as Chief Justice, he's going to lead a liberal majority to expand civil liberties for, in particular, the accused. Some cases to be familiar with, and there's a whole slew here, but you have Miranda versus Arizona. When you watch cop shows or movies, you have the right to an attorney, before you talk. Anything that you say can and will be used against you. That's the Miranda right, the right to know that you have a right to an attorney. Gideon versus Wainwright is the case where the government will appoint an attorney for you if you can't afford one. Some other cases of note: Engel versus Vitale bans prayer in public schools. In Griswold versus Connecticut, this is the basis of the later Roe decision. Griswold versus Connecticut is going to rule in favor of a married couple that's trying to get contraceptives in Connecticut, and this is contraceptives are banned for everyone in Connecticut at this time. And the Supreme Court finds a right to privacy, which is going to allow the sale of contraceptives and later abortion rights in the Roe v. Wade case, which is coming down the road in the Nixon years. 1964 election. This is the biggest numerical landslide up to this point in history, where Johnson is winning in his own right. He's finishing out the last year here of Kennedy's term of office, but Johnson is winning over the senator from Arizona, Barry Goldwater. And the Daisy ad is, that's a very famous ad where the little girl is picking the daisy, and what happens when she pulls the last pedal off is you've got this background of a nuclear explosion, and the implication here is that Goldwater is an extremist, that he's going to lead us into an escalation and expansion of this war against perhaps the Chinese or the Russians here. And some people are thinking here about what happened in Korea after Chinese intervention in late 1950, and where the famous speech that Goldwater gives at the Republican convention when people call him extremist is he says extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, and moderation in pursuit of justice is no virtue. Concerning the Vietnam War, some things to note among several things. Why are we involved in Vietnam? To stop the spread of communism. There's that idea of the domino theory. If Vietnam falls, other countries will fall as well. You've got the Gulf of Tonkin incident, followed by the Resolution 1964, an attack on U.S. destroyers off the coast of North Vietnam, leads the president to ask for permission, a resolution which Congress passes giving him the right to protect and defend American forces in Vietnam. The Ho Chi Minh Trail, this is that supply route that's going through Laos and Cambodia. The Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese, are using this route through neutral countries to equip the communist rebels in South Vietnam. And in 1970, Nixon will invade Cambodia to wipe out the communist sanctuaries, leading to riots, especially on college campuses across the country. The most notable one is at Kent State, where 4 student onlookers are killed by National Guardsmen who are also student age, and there's also 2 killed at Jackson State in the South. The Tet Offensive, this is in 1968. This is this massive attack on about 100 cities in South Vietnam, and it's a simultaneous attack, and this is following the heels where the Johnson administration is saying, we'd see the light at the end of the tunnel, that we're turning a corner, that the war is being won, that the communists are on the ropes. And Americans are watching U.S. embassies taken over by the Cong, and the city of Hue is captured. This is real up close to the DMZ between North and South Vietnam. This is the second largest city in South Vietnam. And the Tet Offensive ultimately is a Cong defeat, and Americans win back everything that is taken, but this is a psychological loss for the United States. The middle class, that silent majority that Nixon is going to be talking to and talking about, is going to want to disengage, to get out of Vietnam, but with honor, without abandoning the South Vietnamese. And in 1968, this is a big year. The AP has asked some questions on, what's more important, domestic events or international events. Talk about why 68 is such a big year. You have the Tet Offensive, you have an election year, and Johnson's going to bow out here. And you have at the Democratic Convention where the Democrats, who've had a very contentious primary season between Johnson and then later the guy who succeeds him, Humphrey, and you've got Eugene McCarthy, not to be confused with Joe McCarthy, the witch hunter guy back in the Red Scare. But you have Eugene McCarthy, and you have Robert Kennedy, who's assassinated, and you have the assassination of Martin Luther King. I guess my point here is this is a year of a lot of social and national turmoil. At the Democratic Convention, which is supposed to be this unifying event, you have essentially a police riot outside against these hippies who are climbing up statues in Grant Park and flying the Kong flag, and they're calling the cops pigs, and they're shouting profanities. And inside the convention, people are unfurling anti-war banners, and it seems like chaos is just sort of breaking out here. So you've got all this is going on, and after Martin Luther King is assassinated, remember you've got in 65, 66, 67, you've got these riots in American cities. In 68, you've got over 100 cities with race riots, and it just seems like the country's sort of falling apart. And Nixon will win this election. Just a comment here, just backing up here. There's an irony here where Johnson, who wins he just clobbers Goldwater in 64. Johnson is stepping down. Hippie protesters are following him. Hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't want your effing war. And he's going to bow out, and LBJ wins. He wins in 64 because the country is prosperous, because there's support for the ideas of the Great Society, promotion of healthcare and fighting poverty and promoting education and supporting consumer protection and environmental protection. There is sympathy for the goals of Kennedy's New Frontier, which are sort of fulfilled here in the Great Society, and this idea that Goldwater is an extremist. But the pendulum swings here. There is a white backlash against what many working class, especially white Americans, see as ingratitude by black Americans, as moral decline here with the hippies and drug use and the protesters and lack of patriotism and the failure to effectively fight the war. And Nixon has this plan. He's got the secret plan. Of course, that plan is Vietnamization, which is to turn the war over to the South Vietnamese. Continuing here on the review sheet, Nixon visit to China. Nixon is going to visit China, and this is in the tail end here while the Vietnam War is still going on. And the big deal here is Nixon is working to drive a wedge between, or further the wedge between China and USSR, who have had a falling out. But Nixon is hoping that China will be of assistance in helping us stop the war. 1973, you have the Yom Kippur War, where the Israelis are sucker punched by the Syrians, and the Egyptian armies invade them on this holy day of fasting and atonement. The United States supports the Israelis. Airlifted military supplies, especially from Germany, are shipped to Israel, and Israel turns the tide. Israel is moving on Damascus and has crossed the Sinai, has crossed the Suez here, and the war is stopped. The Israelis essentially, they had to fight hard to get their to essentially win this war. And the Arabs are humiliated, and they're angry at us and Western Europe, and OPEC is formed. This is the Organization of Petroleum and Exporting Countries, and OPEC basically shuts the tap on oil. There's kind of if you get into the details, they're slowly turning it off, but oil prices just go through the roof. They skyrocket. And in this time period, very short time period, oil prices go from $3 to $12 a barrel. Yeah, I know that's not a lot today, but there is inflation, there's unemployment, and there's what's called stagflation, where you have unemployment and high inflation together. Gas prices just go through the roof. And the 70s is a time of economic doldrums. There's just high unemployment and high inflation, and this is going to nag the administrations here of Nixon and Ford and Carter in years to come. And you should know OPEC. Nixon and Watergate. Nixon is the short version here is there's this burglary at Watergate, bugging the phones of the Democratic National Campaign headquarters. And we may never know whether Nixon ordered this. It does not seem, from what we know, that he ordered it or planned it, but he did cover it up when it came to light, when he found out about it. And for this, the House Judiciary Committee is going to eventually issue 3 articles of impeachment: obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and contempt of Congress, which is the failure to obey a congressional subpoena to turn over these secret tapes, which Nixon had been taping in his office, so that the investigating committee could find out, what he knew and what had happened. The Saturday Night Massacre, this is this incident here where Nixon's Attorney General has appointed a special prosecutor, a special investigator, not a prosecutor, investigator named Archibald Cox, and Cox is going to ask for these tapes. And Nixon is going to order the new Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, to fire him. Richardson resigns, and Nixon asks the Deputy Attorney General, William Ruckelshaus, to fire Cox. And finally, after Ruckelshaus resigns, third man down, Robert Bork fires Cox. So you've got these 3 guys going down, basically because they're putting the heat on Nixon. They're asking for the tapes here. And Nixon is pleading executive privilege. He says these tapes are not any business of Congress. These are his private tapes. These are tapes dealing with national security, with very candid and open conversations, perhaps dealing with national security. And these are something that he or no future president should ever feel that he has to hand over to Congress. And in the Supreme Court case, Nixon versus the U.S., the Supreme Court rules that these tapes have to be turned over. And when these tapes are turned over, there's the smoking gun. There's this, you hear Nixon talking basically about, how's the cover-up going on, and he has knowledge, and he is in support of stonewalling, of blocking this investigation, which leads to his August resignation in 1974, and Gerald Ford coming in as his replacement as president. And last on the list here, on the test will be something about Rachel Carson. And you should know Silent Spring, 1962, the story of DDT working its way into the environment and through the food chain and killing birds of prey such as bald eagles. And basically this book is an environmental manifesto. It's a call to protect the environment from industrial pollution. So this is a quick drive-by of some things that we've talked about in this unit. So study hard, study smart, study early, and good luck.